Okay, so I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you could join us this afternoon. My name is Jeanette Quinn. And I'm the Director of Programs for the Northeast Business Group on Health in New Jersey. Excuse me. We are really excited to bring you today's webinar program on Living Among Dinosaurs, Hacking Employee Engagement. As we know, employee engagement is and continues to be an evolving challenge for employers. So we're really looking forward to hearing Tevis Trower's understanding on how to hack engagement. Excuse me. So before we begin, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. If you want to submit a question, you have a box on the screen where you can submit a question. And Janera Gaston, who is my colleague, will be facilitating the Q&A at the end of the session. So before we begin, I wanted to highlight a couple of events that are coming up, and you can always find these on our website. And they are Tackling Diabetes and Overweight. That's our next webinar on September 28th. On October 12th, we have an employer breakfast on referencing pricing, an innovative employer strategy for managing drug prices and spending. Our annual membership meeting, which is going to be really great, and it's on reinventing your purpose and a life you love with Adam Martell. We have our 4th annual Leapfrog Awards breakfast on November 29th, and on December 4th, we have the 23rd annual Tribute to Leadership. Our last 2 events that I'll mention, and you'll find the locations, the times, the venue, everything on our website, is on December 12th, we have a morning session in New Jersey on unlocking the value of second opinion services. And if you want to hold a date, please visit the website for that information. I also wanted to take a quick moment for those of you who are not that familiar with Northeast Business Group on Health to give you a little bit about for improvement in healthcare policy and the delivery system. And what we do is help employers try the best decisions for high quality care with the best outcomes. And we do this by providing a lot of different options, including educational programs, today's webinars, roundtables, networking opportunities, and other venues. So again, if you'd like more information, you can visit the website. So moving into our guest speaker today, who we're really excited to have, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tevis Trower. She's the founder and CEO of Balance Integration Corporation, and she's a pioneer in optimizing corporate cultures. Recognized in Megatrends 2010 as a corporate wellness guru for the new millennium, Tevis has assisted powerful organizations ranging from Disney to Morgan Stanley in optimizing their most precious assets, human beings. Her company is global, and it serves clients in Europe, the U.S., and Latin America. Tevis has a long list of prestigious companies and organizations with whom she has worked with on executive lifestyle, personal mastery, innovation, and the role of consciousness in creating radical success. And she's proud to live what she teaches. So please join me in welcoming Tevis Trower.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for such a generous intro. I wanted to thank everyone for being here because there are a lot of things on your plate asking for your personal sense of engagement and presence. And so for you to carve out a moment to take a peek behind the scenes at what we have figured out over the past 15 years in serving in this space, A, it's a huge honor because I know time is precious, and B, it's really our intention in crafting this talk that you walk away with some practical skills, tools, and insights, but also hopefully an incremental understanding of what the task really is when we talk about engagement. So before we dive in, I know that sometimes people have to bail early, and we just wanted to say, just by virtue of being here, that we wanted to extend to everyone participating the opportunity to have a 30-minute conversation with us to really have a customized look at what you're doing and maybe some things that you can tweak to enhance and improve. And just by virtue of being here, that's the only thing you need to take advantage of. So you can pop me an email and get you scheduled. So that's the commercial. So why are we here? Well, we dove into this basically because you guys are the stakeholders of corporate culture for the organization. And part of what really fuels us is how do we support the people who are literally holding the pulse of what the organization believes to be true of itself, and how programs and processes are put in place to make that belief a reality, right? We all know that oftentimes there's a gap. And so it's really a sense of compassion that leads us into this work, because we know that whether you're the female in the picture or the guy on the pedestal, or there's a flip or there's a title shift, etc., we know that essentially that you guys are really putting yourselves on the line, and you're stepping forward and asking the organization to invest in what you know is a truth, that how humans go to work every day, how they feel about going to work every day really impacts not only the business outcomes, but their quality of life, their quality of satisfaction, and their longevity. Now, when you're asking for that vote of support, that budget, that access to other people within the leadership structure, we've seen a million times that whether or not everyone's on board with what seems to be all over the covers of every HBR magazine that comes out that says it's human beings, it's values, it's leadership, it's teamwork, all these really, really, really human concerns, we know that whether that stakeholder you're appealing to says yes in the moment, and later, of course, says, whoa, I'm getting afraid, or they say, whoa, straight off of the bat. We've seen so many times that the notion of fostering humanity is truly one of the scariest things for a company to do. And so our intention here is to give you some diagnostics that when you do encounter the dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs might not only be in the C-suite, right? The dinosaurs can be throughout the hierarchy of the company, and we all each have a dinosaur inside of ourselves. So someone who gets a little afraid about being human and vulnerable and attending to your own ability to be passionate every day and engaged every day. And so these tools are really intended to work across that broad spectrum. So we want to give you just a little self-assessment. Now, this is not a pass-fail thing, and this is not anything to beat yourself up. These are basic touch points for you to turn and ask yourself, have I covered this, right? The first thing, of course, is vision. Have you really cultivated for what shifting your culture is going to do for the daily experience of going to work, for that random employee, for yourself, for the C-suite? And by cultivating the vision, it's not only being a student of your own company, but it's really being a student of all the history that you can access within the company, of what the company has said it's true about itself, as well as what it has set forth as being a vision for itself. So you first got to ask that. The second thing is, have you done your homework? Have you sat down with truly disparate parts of the organization to talk to them about how human performance is impacting the ability to deliver on goals? Now, this has to be a broad net, and the reason I say that is that great intentions often stay within the HR or the ops kind of area, and they die, right? They die because it's got to be the information that is most broadly sourced is the information that is going to carry you forward. So how much have you had those conversations internally to really assess the business impact? There are tons of studies that can objectively set forth what kind of common expectations and trade-offs are in terms of the metrics and the ROI on these types of shifts, but really nailing it down in terms of your own company is also going to help you start to socialize these conversations with other senior stakeholders. Have you done your homework? Have you gone into Glassdoor? Have you studied who you are losing talent to? What those other companies are doing? What are your employees saying when they leave? Why do they turn down the offer? So really being able to understand what is the relative position is going to give you an extra sense of where you need to start your work to catch up. Have you started experimenting? Are there small things, small incremental programs, perhaps even just transactional type employee offers, employee touch points, and have you been tracking them actively to be able to see how are they playing off? And then creating the diagnostics that you need to be able to course correct if they are not. Have you gotten some resources? Now, one thing that we see a lot is oftentimes the stakeholders we are working with, if they haven't really gotten buy-in yet, they'll have kind of a small discretionary fund that they can tap into and start to play around with what might the strategy be, how might we go about it that's the way for us to do it as opposed to trying to reinvent ourselves as a Facebook or a Google or something. So getting toes in water and funding it through the resources that you've asked for is one thing to ask yourself. What have I learned along the way? Stakeholder buy-in, because we have seen that the majority of programs with the clients we have worked with over our 15 years working in this space are either made or broken by stakeholders who have either had a voice in crafting the program and crafting the offering and crafting the idea as being central to the culture, or people who have never been talked to, people who have never weighed in. So when we go back to business impact and we go back to looking at some of the data points we're suggesting that you take time to secure, this is really about socializing. It's about making this a conversation that everyone has a voice in, because we're really talking about shifting the corporate voice, both internally and externally. The metrics are key. They need to be taken both periodically as well as real time on a continual feedback loop. So when you look at, well, gee, we have an annual cultural survey, or maybe it's every 2 years, or, well, sometimes we send out a survey after an offering, or, well, we try to get this when people are leaving the company. We try to get this when people turn down an offer, etc. How much are you warehousing all of that data by looking at common questions and common threads that can start to really give you a sense of where your compass is really pointing? And last but not least, is this a quote-unquote initiative? Is this something that is somehow standing apart from the culture? Or is this a way of thinking? Is employee engagement, is calling on the best, on the passion, on the sparkle in the eye, on the pulse in the veins of your employees? Is that a cultural tenet that is held and embedded throughout all the employee touch points that you can even think of? Because what we have found is that when it's some kind of standalone siloed offering, a lot of times that's when it's A, not trusted by the employees, and B, seen as kind of a pest, a fly buzzing around the head of the organization. So ask yourself, how do you stack up with these questions? And when you ask it personally, you can also start to ask, where does my organization stack up with respect to these 8 factors? So how do we get to this? We got to this through 15 years of really being inspired and moved forward by our clients. And true confession, I'm sure this is not a confession to any of you guys, but you guys really hold the insight, the wisdom, and part of our first client we landed in 2002, obviously it's 2017, we've been around for 15 years. This was AOL Time Warner. And when we started the program, we had a very transparent conversation with the head of HR at the time and talked about how do you humanize the workplace? How do you shift this self-inflicted suffering? How do you start to instill a moment of inspiration, a moment of self-mastery throughout the organization? And we got rolling in a really small way, which is oftentimes the perfect way to get something moving, is do it small before you take it big. Now, here's the thing. It's no surprise to anyone on the phone that something small, like a yoga class, or small, like let's have an employee creativity workshop, right? When you do something small, a lot of times the people that you wish in your heart of hearts, you wish in your marrow would attend this stuff, they just won't go. And you'll see the people who are already bought in, right? The people who already care about this stuff, the people who already have a sense of passion and engagement, valuing it. And so the question really became, okay, this is great, but how do you touch everyone else? How do you touch all the people who won't go, who won't participate? And that really became a driving question, is how do you not just have something people have to push away from their cube, their desk, their monitor, their screen, their phone, and go to, and how do you actually have it start and breathe throughout the culture? So what we've been doing is really practicing this question, living into this question with a broad spectrum of clients, everything from the most old school holding company like Amaru Benny to the most hip we worked with, the Yahoos, the Googles, the Huffington Post, etc. And what's interesting is, as much as we look towards what other companies are doing to fuel our creativity, and I mean we, both us and our clients, the most powerful questions and the most powerful solutions always come from looking internally, from looking at what will my culture bear, what will my leadership, my middle managers, my geographies be able to implement and make into a reality. So confession number 2. Some of our most forward-thinking clients have freaked in the face of business distress. Sure, that's also not a surprise. So very storied, I'll call it an assets management company, very, very, very storied, with a legendary founder. Son currently runs the organization. When we first talked to him about how we were going to create a cultural influence that would foster a sense of liveliness and engagement throughout employees, he had skin in the game. He knew that for him to compete with Silicon Valley and all these startups in Silicon Alley, that this was not something they could ignore, that they had to begin to shift their culture. And when I asked him the question every good consultant has to ask, what kind of metrics would you like to see? He turned to me and he said, I get it. I get why you're asking this, and it's the right thing to be asking. But all the triangulation of all the indicators, he said, are basically just trying to read the tea leaves. He was like, many of the metrics we point to as showing that something is a success can be actually attributed to 5 zillion shifts within the culture, within the economy, within the environment, etc. So he said, just get people to participate, just get people to say good things. So that sounds really great. We think we're totally in the clear. Well, lo and behold, 3 years later, their business hits some rocks, and the entire thing is kiboshed. It's gone. So all this war at our stakeholders have done, all the trust that we had cultivated with employees, all the hope, right? They were afraid to participate at first, right? They were testing it. Is this real? Can I trust it? Is my boss going to fuss at me for participating in these things? Is my boss going to reinforce these kinds of core values, right? All of that was kiboshed. And it was partly because, aside from that conversation, that CEO never got involved. He never put his name on anything. He was never socialized throughout the process to ask who might be other people within the organization that we can tap to make sure that this is really being lived by everyone. So this isn't a surprise, right? Because if Harvard can tell us that 96% of senior leaders are suffering burnout themselves, right? And 1/3 are saying it's extreme. When a business hits the skin and people get afraid, how likely are they to continue to take care of themselves? This is a moment when people go from thinking about thriving to thinking about surviving. And surviving is going to include a whole lot of self-care, right? The conditioned patterns within all of us. And we're talking about the C-suite, we're talking about ourselves, and we're talking about the employees, because this is really the crux of employee engagement. We are inviting people to prioritize something that goes above and beyond surviving and invites the notion, a leap of faith, that it's possible to actually thrive. And that's what our nervous system is not programmed for. So confession number 3, if you don't think you're drunk on your own Kool-Aid, then you're probably going to get a hangover. And the reason I say this is that, let me just give you this one example. One of our most forward-thinking clients ever, amazing, multifaceted media, financial services company, really, really a respected, thought-leading, also sweatshop, about 17,000 employees strong. We had a moment of opening within the culture where the leadership said, we want a state-of-the-art culture, and we want it to be reflected in wellness, we want it to be reflected in philanthropy, and wanted it to be reflected in sustainability. And there was this giant epiphany. It was like a renaissance within the culture. And we did all the right things. We had these conversations before the first touch point was created. For their culture, it was the right thing to create an internal brand. We socialized it broadly and had stakeholders throughout participating in conversations about it. Things were shifting in terms of employee engagement being integrated into, et cetera. So everything was really, I think our plum was a time that we had a Tai Chi workshop midday and over 130 people showed up for it. And I'm not saying that that's a testimony to employee engagement. I'm saying it's like the canary in the coal mine that flourishes and flies. And what happened was overnight there was a change in leadership that never got communicated throughout the infrastructure. So we had that it was on life support. And when I say us, I mean internally. Wow. Front, we think that that work has been accomplished. We don't have to continue to do it, and that's just not. No matter what, we're always going to be dealing with the suit, right? The title, the infrastructure, and we have to work to continue to get to the humanity. So the engagement continuum, right? So if any of these examples or those assessment parameters are starting to tease your curiosity open about, well, where is my company? Like, we see this pretty broadly, right? There's old school, right? They should be grateful to have a job, right? Or there's token or transactional, well, we have a yoga class, or, well, we do a gym reimbursement, or we have a happy hour, we got a kegger, right, et cetera. To try, right? We're going to ask people to volunteer for some kind of a committee, et cetera. Being thoughtful. CEO is at least talking about it, and that's a huge opportunity to crack things open to really having a sense of citizenship. Now, this is kind of a nascent term that I'm hearing a whole lot. I'm not sure how much is happening for you guys, but this term is really about how do we speak not to just the wellness, or not to just how much do people proactively volunteer? Are they sticking around? Do they like the culture? But really talking about these human beings as being a citizen, a participant, a co-creator in shaping the voice and the reality of that corporate culture. Is that what we're seeing? Is that what we're believing? And that's when you really know that you're kind of at the forefront of the engagement continuum. So when we think about what is that evolutionary experience for the company, right, we have all been in the presence of cultures that are what we would call human hostile, right? They just resent this kind of thing. They don't get, why can't people set their alarm an hour earlier to take care of personal stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And there are really three elements that when put into the magic black box of your culture and doing it your way, can emerge in such a way that you're really arriving at being corporate compassionate, right? And this is one, really establishing both employee and collective values, right? Are we role modeling it up and down throughout the organization? Are we capturing what that means throughout the organization? Two, are we taking that information and are we turning it into programmatic experiences that actually shift how the employees see their work play out day after day after day? And third, is it integrated throughout the culture? Is it sitting as a siloed type initiative, or has it really become part of the collective voice of the organization, the ecosystem? When we talk about an ecosystem, I want you to think about the various constituencies within the organization, right? Because you've got your C-suite, right, and you've got your high performers, and then you've got the people who are probably at risk, who oftentimes can be high performers as well. And then you've got open enrollment, right? Just kind of general stuff that really becomes part of the ether. So for you guys to look at how you're thinking about shifting or enhancing your culture, your engagement, really think about, am I creating an open dialogue? Am I getting feedback across all three or all four of these triangles? And am I baking that information into both a unified communication strategy as well as cross-functional integration, right? Because what we're looking at is really fostering a sense of humanity, of sustainable humanity, sustainable success. So looking at where that's going to fall for you, there's basically two axes here. One is hierarchical participation, right? The involvement of people throughout the hierarchy. So when you've got a really high amount of that, you've got a really high amount of programmatic leverage throughout the entire company, then you know that you're pretty much arriving at corporate compassionate. Now, you would call these people high performers who have a high amount of engagement and awareness around their own sustainability, right? So let's say you've got a lot of involvement, but there's not a lot of integration, right? It's not actually happening programmatically and procedurally throughout the company. You're going to see that that's the kind of company that's paying a lot of lip service to it, but things just aren't actually happening, right? We're talking a lot about it, but we're not moving it, right? When we get into low hierarchical participation and high programmatic, there's a lot of programs because someone's given the CHRO a green flag and a budget, right? What we see that as being is really survival, right? Where there's a platform, kind of a safety net to catch employees, but their likelihood to participate in it and actually use it and leverage it for their own sustainability is just not as high. And then, of course, in the bottom right corner, we call this the destructive corner, right, where you've got little talk about this stuff, little programs around it. So it's not really even a reality for the organization. But I do want to say that, that even if that is the case, right, no matter where you are on this Intelligencer, which, yes, I stole from New York Magazine because I love their Intelligencer, there is a strategy. There are things that you can do no matter where you are throughout this structure. Why? Right? Well, we all know that right now we are on the precipice of having the millennials outweigh everyone else within the organization. And the impact of that population is not to be understated, right? So yes, they want more flex time. Yes, they're not as easy to predict or call into a meeting, etc. Yes, they have a shorter attention span, etc. All those things are true. But there's also some really cool things, some cool influencers they are bringing around. I know on our team sometimes we'll run into a question about, God, there's got to be an app for that. And we're like, let's call a millennial, right, just to get things done. I know all of us have had that moment. And what's interesting is even with a contrast in values, lifestyle preferences, etc., when we look at what all from the millennials to the Gen X to the boomers, there's not a lot of variation between our expectations of ourselves or our desires for ourselves within the spectrum of our career goals. So we need to bear that in mind, because here's really the net. In this book, Spend Shift, right, it was found that from 2005 to 2009, just as the bulk of the millennial population was coming into adulthood and really being surveyed, is when the largest shift in values, consumer values, has been captured, right? So things such as exclusivity, right, luxury, etc., that really started to fall, and what rose was kindness and empathy and purpose and reason, socially responsible. Now, I know I'm talking about a consumer value, but I want you to think about this, right? We are in an echo chamber of marketers who are dying to get into the pockets of these folks, right? And so it's not just that they are bringing these values to bear, it's that our entire society has become an echo chamber of kindness, of friendly, socially responsible, right? Empathy, etc. And so we are being surrounded and marinated in these messages and concepts just as they are. And it's really shifted us to begin to ask ourselves, not only are we experiencing that at work, but even as investors, do I want to put my money in companies that don't hold these values? Do I want to work for companies that don't hold these values? So looking at baby boomers and Xers and the millennials, there's a couple really cool things to see here, right? Killer job, killer lifestyle, killer life. We've really seen this come across the spectrum, saying, I want to thrive in every area of my life. And if I hate my job and I don't feel good about my company, I'm not going to feel good about my life. And that's one of the key things that we're seeing and hearing. Two, institutions. What's so fascinating is the willingness increasingly throughout our society, not just with the millennials, but our willingness to say this institution doesn't get it. I'm going to leave and create a new one, or I'm going to find one that is creating itself in a better way. But what I really love is this whole thought that as much as we all saw the helicopter parenting, et cetera, we all talked about that a lot in the past 10 years. The fundamental truth underlying that is we're talking about people for whom nurturing has been a part of their daily reality in a way that has not been true of previous societies, right? So when you think about this, if nurturing is basic expectation I have, and I go to work and I'm feeling exploited, I'm not feeling nurtured, my needs are not being met, I've got a real contrast in what core expectations I have and the values being supported by the organization. The net is that all of these needs are fundamental to all of us, no matter when we were born, what pocket we fall into. But when we're looking at crafting a culture of employee engagement, we have to really be thinking across the entire spectrum of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and not just for the millennials, but for the organization as a whole. Because if we're not speaking to the Xers and the boomers around this, then we're kind of starting to foster two cultures, which is just going to tear the organization apart. So we want to give you kind of a case study of how this has played out for one of our clients. And This is a more recent client. We've been with them for about 4 or 5 years. So this is, again, the kind of client that's got the marble floors and the mahogany walls, and you walk in and you feel like you're going into the Met. And there are a whole lot of Xers and boomers who have built the wealth of this firm. The stakeholder that brought us in is one of the most forward thinkers we have worked with, and he's pretty courageous because he sees the case system that he is working, and he's not afraid to have a vision, right, which is really key. Even with kind of the impression that, oh my God, it's never going to work here, he still has that idea in his heart and in his mind that he's working towards, right? It's a traditional culture. He's got buy-in at the top, but throughout the rest of the senior folks, they have been, up until I'd say our 3rd year, kind of just holding it at arm's length, right? So this hierarchy, the case system, et cetera, but they are having to compete more and more for talent. Though their name carries a lot of weight, there's a lot of ways that a young, smart person out of a top school can make a couple $100,000 coming straight out of school, right? So their collective emphasis on earnings is really key, and our stakeholder knows that he's not going to be able, like that's going to continue, and that has to continue because it's key to their performance and their culture. The question is, how can he make engagement part of that emphasis on earnings? He's got spread out folks in the U.S. and globally, and each of these offices, some have happened through an acquisition, a merger, et cetera. So he's got a lot of cultures and subcultures to contend with. On top of that, they've got some changes at the top happening, which always makes people grip and turn a little bit more reptilian brain than they may have been otherwise. And at the same time, he's trying to get the company to invest in this human experience. They're cutting back on the structure of how do they deal with insurance premiums, what are the structures of all the benefits, et cetera. So there's a retraction going on which decreases employee trust and can really set some people's entitlements right at the moment that he's saying, hey, come be engaged, try this, it'll be great. There's no precedent for anything speaking to employees, and there's not a lot of ways. Very that's been socialized throughout the organization. So even with this and a limited spend, he's done great. And for one thing, he's taken an iterative approach. It hasn't been concerned brought up topics and self-care aspects, creativity, et cetera, that push the envelope of what the firm has talked about internally in the past. But he's done it in an iterative way instead of, kind of dousing the culture with it. We began with a New York office, and in the subsequent years, we expanded it to the remainder of the U.S. and the remainder of the planet. We socialize broadly. We talk to everyone we can. We brought people into conference rooms. We talked to them one-on-one. He socialized it one-on-one significantly with the influencers he could identify. You have to bear in mind he was new to the organization, so person by person, he's really started to have their voices not only matter, but be reflected actively in the communications and structures, et cetera. The first time we ever talked to stakeholders about creating these types of experiences for employees, what's really interesting is no one believed it was possible. They said no one will ever participate in stuff like that. It's going to be a failure. It's going to be awkward, et cetera. So by being incremental and iterative, it's really borne out. So at this point, we've got integration with our senior leaders, our communications folks, the high potential programs, the recruitment and the orientations. It's really throughout the breadth of the culture. So you go from mahogany and marble floors to 3 years later, people are confident enough to participate in things that have them laying on the floor and meditating together, right? Now, this isn't an 8-hour retreat. Obviously, it's probably a 20-minute kind of offering, a pit stop of some sort. But what we did was we leveraged wellness. Wellness is a great, kind of a Trojan horse to foster a conversation around humanity at work. For one thing, you do have the conversation about cost savings and premiums, but fundamentally, to even create cost savings and premiums, people have to get engaged and have to start to think that this is work relevant. So we built on that success. We did some rebranding, and we fostered a lot of trust across these groups by bringing them into the conversation, but also by leveraging engagement type experiences in team meetings, offsites, etc. So our touch points, right? We went from 1 to 21 places on the planet, increasing the audience by 58%. We grew from 1,100 touch points, times employees experienced something that was humanity focused, engagement focused in nature, to over 31,000 expected by the end of this year. What does that do to a culture when 31,000 times over a population of under 2,000 people, people are being reminded to be attentive to being at their best, to being mindful, to keeping their head clear, to resting enough, to fueling themselves intelligently, right? To getting downtime so that they can refresh their creativity and restore their body's ability to heal itself. All of that has really started to happen. Did we use some really kind of backhanded stuff like a competition? Yes. We even had a competition around sleep hygiene, right? So we played with what we know people are going to respond to get them to do the things they need to do to fuel their own personal engagement and sense of purpose and passion at work. We shifted from pulling people into a conference room to experience this kind of stuff to really pushing it out and putting it throughout the organization. So 85 to 100% of survey respondents across the broad spectrum say, yeah, people should be doing this more. We need more of this. So when you think about all this, I'm just being mindful of time because we want to have time for Q&A. So when you think about all of this, I want you to think about where you are currently across these 8 touch points of vision, business impact, the relative position compared to index companies. Have you gotten your toes in the water? Have you gotten any financial resources or cobbled together a slush fund for yourself to start to play? Stakeholder buy-in. Are you having this conversation with the people whose buy-in are really going to make or break, no matter where you think they may be along the spectrum from human hostile to corporate compassionate? Have you started to aggregate the metrics and really started to look at what is the information that you're gathering, and can you start to structure it in such a way that you can compare apples to oranges? And then last but not least, when you think about engagement and think about really driving people to know that that how they are at work is a fundamental driver to what they accomplish at work, right? Have you started to look at counterintuitive ways to drive that message home so that employees know that this is not just an initiative from HR, this isn't just wellness, it's not just a philanthropy thing, right? But that it's really part of the we, part of what the organization believes to be the most valuable thing about itself, above and beyond the mission statement that always says our employees are our most valuable assets. So with that said, I'm going to pause for questions.
Okay, Tevis. This is Janira Gaston, everyone. I'm Director of Programs for the Northeast Business Group on Health, and I have Jeanette's role in New York, and I'm really pleased to have, I just had to take a pause and take a breath Tavis. I hope you are too, and having a little drink of water or something, because that was just an amazing and informative presentation that you gave. It was simply outstanding, and I, especially appreciated almost that evolution of companies. I love pictures, and that whole evolution of looked like some troglodyte to an employee sitting at, that was absolutely amazing. And hopefully the folks who are with us on the phone somewhere in between there and moving much farther towards the right. So now everyone, it's your opportunity to ask Tevis some questions if you have them. And I would like to kick off, though, Tevis, with one question while we're waiting for our folks to type in their questions. What is it, or what are we to do, or employers to do, if we're pretty sure that our organization is culturally human hostile? We know that, employers are, they're sitting on, the line, they're listening to you, and they're going, oh my God, I've just got to start with that guy that was, totally on the left, that these folks should appreciate they have jobs, Yeah. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, so the thing that's interesting about dealing with kind of the human hostile, the dinosaurs, right, is that ignoring them or sidelining them is never going to work. It will, from what we have seen, again, over close to 100 clients in 15 years, that not drawing them into some kind of a socialization process is really short-sighted. What our strategy has been is to construct a series of one-on-one conversations that are very short and very to the point, that either we have with clients or our clients have themselves, and we help them to structure those conversations to really engage those people in understanding why they feel the way they feel and what they see happening in the world. Now, this is a scary thing, and I know that there are many ways on this planet currently that we're not talking to each other who we don't agree with, right? But by stepping into that room and having that conversation, you kind of accomplish two things, right? You open the opportunity to have new insight from that person that may indeed help you make even better whatever it is that you end up planning and implementing, point one. Point two, it's a very safe venue through which to try and win and persuade and plant seeds, plant some maybes in the mind of that stakeholder. So my first thing would be walk towards them, don't walk away from them, right? They are not going to go away, and it's not a healthy thing to sideline them from the culture. While you are doing that, it's also super, super important to have those same types of conversations with the senior stakeholders around them, because what you are accomplishing by having those conversations as well is they are having their voices brought in as impactful to what the strategy will be. And so you're kind of, you're turning it into a chorus as opposed to a bunch of soloists. And that's really key because we're talking about an ecosystem with a lot of living parts in it.
Thank you for that. Many of our employers, and this is I know another question that employers are very thoughtful about, or even, very much involved in, is building a brand around some of these well-being campaigns and corporate campaigns, and they're investing a lot of money in these campaigns. So what's your take on this? The internal brand and the big interest, that they're supposed to promote this cultural shift. What is your thought about it?
Well, it's such a good question because, and I'm going to say, which everyone hates, it depends. When you've got a culture with a strong legacy of internal branding, right? When internal branding is something that people expect, whether it's, hey everyone, we're going for some huge sales goal and we're going to call it fireworks, right? And this quarter is going to be the fireworks quarter or something, and we're going to put fireworks out every time we hit a sales goal or something, right? Like this kind of stuff. When you have a culture that internal branding and that kind of messaging is both credible, it's part of how the business motivates itself of performance, it's absolutely right and good and supportive and great to spend some time in crafting an internal brand, because otherwise it won't be perceived as being something that's solid, right, as real. And pardon me, I just love the ambient noises of Broadway. So that's one thing. But above and beyond the brand, those conversations will have to happen outside of the stakeholders of that brand. So it can't just live with the Get Fit folks, right? Let's say the Get Fit is the brand that you create. The stakeholdership of what happens in Get Fit and the notion of engagement, passion, purpose, and fostering it still has to happen above and beyond what that brand stands for. If your company does not have a legacy of internal branding and you come up and you say, great, I got this great campaign, it's probably not going to be trusted. It's probably going to be seen as, oh, great, here's employee engagement, they just want us to work harder, right? Or great, how long is this gonna last? I'm going to get a folder to put on my shelf and then we all go back to work as usual. So I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. Another question for you. How would you suggest that employers who currently have them or even considering them maximize the use of things like employee resource groups, or maybe even some of these employee champions? Like how can they use them?
Oh, I would absolutely get them engaged. So we've seen a number of structures be super helpful, both in terms of leveraging them for insight, because a lot of these groups have active conversations with constituencies within the organization that oftentimes don't really feel themselves as being part of right? And from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, we've gone from accepting that or from tolerating that there are a broad spectrum of ideas and lifestyles and preferences, et cetera, within the organization, to tolerating them, to saying, okay, they're okay, we're going to accept them, to finally saying, okay, you belong here. And these resource groups and kind of sticks, right, within the corporation really are a lifeline. It's kind of an early precursor to it's getting their voices into the common conversation, and having what they care about and they are worried about actually start to shift what the entire company is prioritizing and talking about. So leveraging for insight, absolutely. But I think the other thing is super important. Give them something to do. Give them a way to participate. Give them ownership of something. Give them expectations and deliverables, so that it's not just a bunch of kumbaya, right? But you're literally tasking them with helping do some background analysis, with coming back to report on something, with having some brainstorming sessions on their own, right? And really bringing to bear what should we be doing to foster a stronger ecosystem for the organization. By giving them something to do, that's when you're harnessing some potential there. And it really goes from blah, blah to being active.
That's great, because it sounds like with some of them, it's like you build it and you think everybody's going to come and all of a sudden the magic will happen. But the reality is that you kind of need something to sort of chew on and to get excited about, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you said that perfectly. The other thing that I've seen is that it's kind of like having an employee that you say, hey, be engaged, be empowered, et cetera, but you're not asking anything of them, right? If we've got a resource like an employee SIG, an employee research group, engage them by asking engage, right? I mean, it's super, super easy to wax philosophical, right? But when you give them a task, things happen, things change.
Okay. All right, and I think we have time for just one last question, and that is, what is a balance assessment, and how can that help employers?
So what we do and what we encourage everyone to do is to really think about what are the broad stroke realities of the organization. And it's one thing to think about it in a vacuum. It's another thing to say, over the next half hour, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write down everything I know to be true of us, like as if I'm reading a dossier of us, right, with respect to culture and employee participation, engagement, programs, all of those things, right? And so the structure that we take people through is basically a touch point on what are those objective truths, right? What is true of the size, what is true of the demo, what is true of who stays and who leaves, what is true of how long people stayed, what is true of what leadership says is important, what is true of what kind of touch points employees currently experience, what is true of what is not working, where our pain points are, what we need to prioritize as being a big rock for us to solve. It's kind of funny. It's kind of like people always say to you, oh, go and journal, right? And you go, I don't want to do that. I know. I think all the time. I don't need to do that. There is something magic about taking dedicated time and attention and really thinking through what this architecture is, right, the bones of the organization, as well as what is the flesh on the bones, to really be able to identify and diagnose what needs to happen next and what are the smartest next steps you can take or you can set in motion for the organization to begin to foster some positive change, support of greater humanity at work.
Thank you. It looks like we are up at our time. I really do think every organization can go through one of those wonderful assessments. I mean, that's just a huge value to getting folks started, moving them along. I don't see any other questions coming in. And again, it looks like we are at our time. So Heather and Marjorie from Balance Integration, thank you so much for helping us today. This is an absolutely fabulous way to spend an hour. I think it was interesting and just really thoughtful in terms of the information that you've shared with us. I know I'm hoping that I speak for the others on our participants, and that this is a great way to spend that hour. And thanks also to Jeanette Fuente, my colleague in New Jersey, for really working hard on this and getting this all together. But on any last words, Teva?
No, just super grateful to everyone who took time to be here, and to you guys for all your hard work to make this happen. Thank you so much. We're really grateful.
Thank you so much. All right, and everyone have a great afternoon.